Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. Here we are on End Times Friday.
Good morning.
In May, actually, I think it's right before Mother's Day. It's coming up, and we're excited. It's also our grandson's birthday. Will be tomorrow on the 13th.
Oh, is that Aiden or Josh?
Yeah, Aiden.
Aiden, okay. I'll tell him I said happy birthday. Caleb will officially, Caleb wrapped up school in December, but he officially walks graduation ceremony on that same day.
Oh,
so
cool.
That'll be lots of celebrating going at both of our houses that day, huh?
Yeah, that'll be a good, great big weekend. And so we're, real excited about that. And as we, have talked about, what's going on in the world, we've kind of been highlighting the instruction by God that says, pay attention, watch for the signs, and then let me guide you into going forward about what that means. It's interesting. Recently, I've had a lot of inquiries, and it's really kind of fresh. These are fresh viewpoints, but the inquiry is from people that that haven't really been following even what we've been talking about, but they're going to now. Is something going on?
Do I need to be paying attention?
Yeah, do I need to be paying attention? It seems like things are happening that I can't fully understand, and they seem strange, and they seem happening that is that indication that there's a season coming up or a different season coming up. So I think the signs, as I've been experiencing it, is I think they're starting to be obvious. And people that even typically don't watch it, so to speak, because they're not purposely doing it. But
Right.
all of a sudden, it's
Starting
like
to take
wait a
notice.
minute, I'm reading this, or I'm seeing about this, or I'm not sure about that, but what are we supposed to do? And of course, Jesus, said, watch, pay attention. When we talked, I think last time about when you see Israel formed up as a nation, and then you begin to see these things, it's the beginning of birth pangs. And remember, birth pangs means it's coming.
Right.
And of course, our timing is always different than God's timing because
Right.
But go ahead.
Before, birth pang is such a beautiful illustration of that, because as those increase, it's like an increase in frequency and duration, and the timing between each one as you get closer and closer decreases.
That's right.
So you see that sine wave collapse on itself. Is kind of what you picture in that, and so I think that's also very indicative of what goes on.
Yeah. And think about just that illustration is that when you have a birth pang, it's not like, well, you had it, and then I guess you got to wait and see what happens. It's the pangs themselves, like you say, start to get longer, deeper, and more frequent, which means it's coming. Oops, getting ready. Hey, it's coming.
Yeah.
Hey, here it is. It's coming. And of course, it's indicative that there is a sequence to it and a speed to it, and because of God's timing is different than our timing. Our viewpoint is, well, I see this, so I guess it's any day now, and God says, well, it's coming, but don't you put your own time span on it,
Right.
of what that looks like, particularly in light of, for 2,000 years, he said, watch. And people have interpreted, well, I guess maybe it's now or coming now. And particularly during, for example, World War II with Hitler, it was,
Right.
he's the Antichrist. So this, one world, there's trying to do one world government, here it is. And it wasn't, but it was just, an indicator of it. But there are a couple of interesting things happening that we do need to pay attention to. And we talked last time about, the Saudi Arabia basically moving away from Israel and lining up with Russia, China, Iran, and moving away from the petrodollar and the reliance on the West, what we call the West and the United States and Israel, and forming a whole different block economically. That and theologically, that was they're going to be anti-Israel, which has to happen, by the way. So that was kind of monumental. A couple interesting things also is the Wall Street Journal did a recent survey of just expectations about recession.
Right.
And the expectation at the moment is over 60% of business people believe that a recession is coming, and a large percentage of them think it may be pretty deep. Economically, this is what's called self-fulfilling prophecy, and that
Right.
When you expect it, then people start to pull back and
Right.
let
And businesses plan accordingly.
and businesses plan accordingly, and then they actually contribute because then they don't have as many people hired, or they let people go, and then they accelerate the decline because they think it's coming. They actually contribute to it coming,
Right.
and then it comes. So, we expect it. Also, and this is interesting. This was as I was, looking at information, and it just kind of popped up. And I looked at it. It was there's over 300 major corporations. This is in the United States. 300 major corporations that are planning on shutting down locations.
Wow.
So even somebody like a Walmart or a Costco, and a variety of stores, both retail, restaurants, other types of businesses that usually sell out of these locations are purposely planning to close them down completely, as well as then lay people off as a result of it. So people are going to be out of work, which is going to stimulate even further, the decline. So
Right.
I think we just need to be aware of it, that when you're in a season, and we've had a very unusual kind of pattern. I don't know if you remember 2008 when the whole thing collapsed
Right.
because of the mortgages, and that was a severe, recession because so many people got laid off, couldn't pay mortgages, etc. And then there was a stimulus and recovery of it, and then the interest rates by the Fed and the banking system went basically to zero.
Right. It
And
stayed almost there for a very long time.
yeah, and they were there for literally 12 plus years, and typically recession seasons, and they can be gradual, but they cycle in 3, 4, 5 year cycles where up and then down, up and then down, and because of the conditions, particularly with COVID, that caused a short-term blip, but we haven't experienced really since 2008 until now any real downturn.
Right.
It's always been up. Now, there's one other interesting thing about this. Typically, when there's an upturn, which we've been in for quite a while, gold and silver prices drop dramatically because usually there's a choice that people make is, well, I'll invest in the things that are going to be accelerating, and I don't need to hedge myself with gold and silver, so the prices drop, typically. In this case, they didn't. While the economies were growing, well, that's the interesting thing, is that then behind it is supply and demand. And as you look at supply and demand, the ability of buying gold and silver continued in a big way. And what was happening is governments like China and Saudi Arabia is one of them, Russia, are buying gold in big quantities because they're trying to move their currency to a gold standard. And they know that when the deep recession hits, that the prices of these, even though they've been building it up, are going to go even higher. And so it's an unusual pattern that it should have dropped, but it didn't. Actually, it's actually increased as well. And then we're in this unique spot. And because of it, the people in business haven't really been through a recession in quite a while. And you forget, what it's like or how to prepare for it or what to do with it, because you assume, I guess it's just going to be okay, or it'll be minimal. But it could be, this one could be deep. And there's now the survey that says we expect it to happen. We expect it to be deep. So it's likely to happen. And the only encouragement here is, as we go into the season, is to at least consider that for where that rests with our situation, and how to make sure that you have savings and that you are being wise in your investing, and be careful about debt, and just a variety of things to be in a position where it won't crush you if it happens. And even if you get laid off, but you can make it through. And God says, I'll protect you and provide for you anyway if you have a heart to follow. Another interesting thing, and this is we've talked a little bit about this, but it's now becoming more pronounced, is the one world currency, digital currency. And there's an article that just came out this week that highlights all that's been going on behind the scenes between the governments of the world, particularly the United States, and the central banks. In our case, we call it the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, if you remember, the Federal Reserve is not a U.S. institution. It's a foreign institution that's owned by foreigners, but they control the banking system. So what they've been doing is developing what's called a central bank digital currency. CBC, and the acronym is CBDC.
Okay.
Central Bank Digital Currency, CBDC. So, and what's happening is that, when we think about it, people say, well, aren't we kind of electronic now? Really, because you use credit card and you have maybe a little bit of paper money, but fundamentally you got a bank account, you write a check.
But by and large, people don't use much cash. Yeah.
Everything is happening electronically. But this is different. And it's going to go to a registration of a database that controls that currency, so that one, it tracks every single transaction a person makes. So there's a database that will be behind it, that when you use this currency, which everybody will be forced to at some point, then they'll exactly know every little place that you spend money, because it'll all be registered and recorded. So there's going to be knowledge of that. One, on the other side of it, and this is what the article was talking about, is that they've been working on this, is control. And control is that they can decide the rules, literally, of how you spend. So, like, for example, and they said they can tie it to political desires. So let's say they want to reduce the amount of gasoline that is bought in the United States. Well, they can say, we're going to allow you so much dollars or so many gallons per month. When you reach that number,
they could put a cap on.
We're going to shut that down. They can flip basically the control of it through parameters that says you can't now execute that transaction. So you can't go fill up with gas, or you can't go do this thing. And so the whole issue is about when the one world currency comes about, there is this loss of freedom. Interesting enough, the world readily embraces it, which is, again, as you think about between here and there, something has to happen, because at the moment, if they put this in place, let's say tomorrow, okay, that's it. Everybody has to have digital currency, controlled by the central bank. And by the way, this is interesting. I didn't realize this, and I dug into it a little bit. But when you hand your money into a bank account, you actually don't own that money. The bank owns the money. Now, the rules are that you have the right to use it and to move it, and they don't have the right to prevent you from that. But legally, they own that money. It's not yours. So that when the one currency comes and it's now all digitized by the bank, interesting enough, you don't own any of it, and you lose your right, if they want to pull the switch, to actually make your own decisions about how you're going to spend it. And it's there already. The structure's already there. That's what's interesting. The whole structure is being put together to use it. So, but if it happened tomorrow, there would be an outcry of people who say, I've lost my freedom, my determination, and I don't like it, and I'm gonna try to come against it. But when the one world government comes in place with this one currency that is controlling, the world readily accepts it, and they surrender that right. And in a sense, there's not even an emotional reaction to that. It's like, well, I guess this is a good thing. And by the way, one element of it is that they say it'll be completely protectable, so that hacking can't get to what's yours, supposedly, how they characterize it as yours. And so people say, well, that's good. If that prevents thievery, then won't that be a good thing? And yeah, so what that they control me because of what I believe the economic collapse that has to happen. There's going to be a willingness to accept it. So there's still things to happen. And the only thing that struck me is that it's way further along than I had thought, and they purposely are talking about the control mechanism of it. And it's not just, hey, we're just doing this to have a currency. It's that we're going to be able to make decisions, control what you spend, how you spend it, and there will not be any more ownership of those assets, and the government's going to own it. So it's interesting that when you think of what has to happen for the one world government, things are being put in place, and now it's not even fuzzy. Well, like, how is that going to work? We're getting shown, well, this is how it's going to work. So anyway, it's just the key is, pay attention, be open to it. Again, I don't think it's anything imminent in terms of days, weeks, or even maybe a year or two, but things are happening, that were coming up.
And we're paying attention.
And pay attention, and then, know what to do, and particularly with the banking system changing to probably get rid of regional banks into these big corporate banks, and just even for the protection of your own funds, is you may want to look at that kind of stuff. So we'll keep talking about this, and lots happening, lots moving on the economic front, and we'll try to keep up with it. As we've been talking about it, we had a discussion about being diligent in seeking God and understanding God. And when he gives the story of the parable of the talents, it's actually following the whole description of his discussion at the end times. So it's part and parcel to that discussion of what's going to happen, and he describes it. Jesus describes it. Then he says, don't be foolish. And one is, don't think you're a Christian and you really aren't, because you think, well, I can choose that later. And he says, well, there might be a time where you're alive and think you can choose it, but it's not going to happen because of the end. So, and also don't be foolish not to have oil preparation for things that are coming. So be prepared for that. And then he goes into this parable of the talents as a sequel to that. So if you would go ahead and read Matthew 25, little bit long, but it's worthy of reading it. 14 through 30. Matthew 25, 14 to 30.
For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away, and cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Yeah. So,
Is that where you want?
yeah, that's good.
Starting?
Yeah, that's good. So the whole story, is interesting because obviously a lot of preaching is on the talents, and because of our word talent, we kind of attribute that word to the English word, which is, your gifts and the things and your things that you are good at, and are you investing them, for God? Well, first of all, this is the talent in this situation is just about the money.
Right. It's a measure of money.
It's a measure of money, and it's even 1 talent is a big payday. 5 talents would have been extraordinary. 2 talents would have been amazing. So everybody was giving basically a blessing to start with. Okay, now go back to verse 14 and just read the first verse so that we kind of understand something about that. It's a really interesting statement that he makes that we need to understand.
For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them.
Okay. Now remember, he's talking about the end, and he attributes it to the kingdom of heaven. He's trying to say something there that, as I try to help everybody understand, it's really, the whole thing is really about my kingdom and living in my kingdom and experiencing me in the kingdom. And the kingdom, first of all, is critical just to the life of us with God, because he said that happens in the kingdom. As a believer, you can believe, but in order to live with me, you have to surrender from the flesh, thinking in the flesh, and this is out of Romans, into the living in the Spirit and live in the kingdom by letting me be the king, and you surrender your will to me, and then now you're following the Holy Spirit, not following self. He said,
Right.
Now in the end, it even gets more critical about the kingdom, because it's going to be very confusing what is about ready to happen, because he described it, remember, in Matthew 24 about all that's going to happen, and he said there'll be a lot of deception, there'll be lots of things that won't be clear, there'll be things that you think are one way and they're really a different way, and he said the only way you can sort it out is to be in the kingdom. And I'll sort it out for you. So all my instruction, all my direction will be coming by you being in the kingdom, because it's critical to be able to follow and understand and get through it. And then he said this, and we'll get back to this as we get into it, is that enter into my joy. And when we think of the tribulation, because remember, that's what he's talking about, the end and the tribulation, is that it doesn't seem like it's going to be very, very joyful.
Right.
He said, well, if you're walking with me, you will be living in joy, even ultimately if you're sacrificed physically and you die because of it, there's still a joy to that. There'll still be a joy to that. And so he's saying that of all the things that I'd like you to understand, and we'll dig into this about what does it mean to be faithful, etc., is I'm inviting you to live with me in the kingdom. I'm going to give you assignments. I'm going to ask you to be faithful, and we'll talk about that. If you are faithful, you're going to have joy, and you won't have gnashing of teeth. You won't be in anguish, and you will be preserved. Because remember, he has preceded this by saying, if you follow me here, he says, I'm gonna keep you safe from certain things that are going to happen, and it'd be a good idea. So we'll get into this next week about the specific application of, well, what does it mean to be faithful, and what's the difference of not being faithful, and what's the reward for being faithful, and why? So it's kind of an important thing, and it just so happens that all by itself, it's a great spiritual truth, but on top of it, he's attaching it to the end. So we just need to pay more attention to that. So it'll be fun. So we'll pick that up next time and next week, and we'll pick this up. So stay tuned, and we'll get into this very important topic.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing. And as always, if you have questions from today, send them in at questions@afjministry.com, and we'd love to talk about them. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Yep, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.